Meat Boy is back. Today we are making a carnivore meatloaf recipe, and whether you want to be completely carnivore or just increase the quality of animal products and ingredients in general in your recipe, I'm going to show you guys how. Now, compared to most carnivore recipes, this is quite a bit of ingredients. In regards to equipment, all you're going to need is the loaf pan for the meatloaf, a bowl to mix everything up in, a cutting board if you'd like to incorporate some brains, which we're going to, as well as some bowls to mix things up in. So let's start with the ground beef, and today I'm using the organ grind we have on Frankie's Free Range Meat. We'll have this available. It's beef, beef heart, beef liver, as well as beef kidney. So it's an approachable way to get all of your organ meats in. Here I have some organic pork bacon, and I was going to suggest to not use this as it's usually a bit high in omega-6, but I've had this sitting in my fridge for like 2 months, and you know, we might as well use it, as bacon wrapped meatloaf is a pretty classic recipe. For omega-3s, I have some lamb brains on Frankie's Free Range Meat. So what we're going to do with this is chop 1 or 2 up really fine, and it kind of turns into a paste. You could also throw it in the food processor, and we're going to mix that in with the meatloaf just to make it more nutritious. This would be a great way to get omega-3s for your kids. And I like brains because you don't have to worry about the pollution that fish might have. Speaking of omega-3s, we also have some eggs. Here I have from a local farm, and we're just going to use 2 for 2 pounds of ground beef. Technically it's supposed to be 1.5, but that's fine. We'll just use a little bit less milk. And this is something else that's been sitting in my fridge for like 2 months. Normally I would use raw milk, but I forgot to order some. I do have some raw cream, but we really do need milk to thin out the mixture a little bit. We have a little bit of grass-fed butter. We have this on Frankie's Free Range Meat as well, just to add a little bit of that butter flavor. And of course we have some cheese. This is raw milk Grana Padano. Again, on Frankie's Free Range Meat, you can use Parmigiano Pecorino. We're just gonna grate some into the meatloaf. For seasoning, I have some colatura, some fish sauce, as well as some honey. We're gonna make a nice little glaze with these 2 that we can put over the meatloaf. So everything here is carnivore. From a nutrient perspective, since this is an organ grind, it's incredibly high in B vitamins and also has a decent amount of vitamin A from the liver. The pork bacon is some fat-soluble vitamins, heavy on the vitamin A, protein, saturated fat. Downside, it's a little high omega-6. All 3 of these dairy products here, since they're made with high-quality milk, are incredibly high in fat-soluble vitamins. The cheese and the butter might have a little bit of K2. Excellent source of calcium, a variety of minerals, even has iodine. But overarching in all of these ingredients is a very high amount of B vitamins, which is one of the main things people are lacking in their diets nowadays. Brains are one of the most nutritious foods, and as we said, we really want the omega-3. That's what we're getting these for. Yes, they have vitamin C, vitamin E, great source of minerals as well, but the focus for these is omega-3. I have a video on eggs a little while ago, and it goes over how eggs are one of the most nutritionally complete foods. Only thing they're missing might be a little bit of iron. So before we mix everything together, I just want to chop up the brains and grate the cheese. The easy way to do this might be to just throw the eggs, the brains, melted butter in the food processor. But even with just a knife running through these brains, they mash up really easily. So for the butter, I'm going to put 2 or 3 tablespoons just in a saucepan on low heat to melt. So Grana Padano is basically a slightly less aged version of Parmigiano Reggiano. It's a bit more affordable. From a flavor perspective, it's kind of hard to tell a difference. So it's great to use when you're mixing into recipes. Quick, just scramble the 2 eggs. And in the 2 eggs, I'm going to put half a cup of milk and another 1/4 cup on my countertop. So in a lot of meatloaf recipes, you'll see some type of glaze, usually made with something sweet plus ketchup. Today we're going to use about 2 tablespoons of raw honey and 2 tablespoons of fish sauce. Here I have colatura di Alisi, and we're actually going to have this on Frankie's Free Range Meat next week, if you want to wait for that. This is garum. It's an Italian-style fish sauce. You could also get red boat fish sauce. This is definitely a higher quality product. It seems to be more fat and oil based, so it's a lot more flavor and more nutritious as well. Now, if you were doing a traditional recipe, this is where you can add onion, garlic, parsley, ketchup, variety of seasonings to each of these components. So the butter is melted on the stove. I'm going to pour that into the milk and egg mixture. Now I'm going to add a couple teaspoons of salt to this egg mixture so we don't have to season the meat itself. And you might think this is going to be really salty with the Parmesan cheese and the fish sauce, but the meat's going to be under-seasoned if you don't add salt to this. So we have our 2 pounds of organ grind, and by all means you could use regular ground beef as well. I would actually prefer the flavor of regular ground beef. Here's the 1 lamb brain. Got our 1/2 cup of milk, 2 eggs, and 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm just going to mix this through now. And normally with the meatloaf you have quite a bit of breadcrumbs, so it's going to be a lot wetter than most people are used to. It's not really that big of a deal if you put too much liquid, because you're pouring this into a loaf pan. You know, so if anything, you can have some kind of like soupy mixture. What really matters is how coarsely your meat is ground. Since this is so fine, it's getting kind of like soupy and creamy, which isn't really ideal, but end product is going to be the same as a normal meatloaf. Grana Padano cheese goes in. So we have a variety of ingredients here, adding a lot of flavor. But I would argue the most important one is that high quality raw cheese. So, you know, make sure you got something good and a lot of it. So this is good. You could go for a drier texture, but you know, when you cook something, it dries out anyway. It's going to solidify and harden. Now we want to line the loaf pan with the bacon. Most of you guys can probably find some beef bacon at a local supermarket, especially Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. They tend to carry that stuff. Ideally, you would go to, you know, a local farm, get some high quality pasture raised bacon. Even better, you know, we have the Iberico pork belly on Frankie's Free Range Meat. And you can make your own bacon. I think I have a recipe video on bacon that we did a couple months back. You know, the more work, the more effort you put into sourcing your ingredients, the healthier the end product is going to be. If you like having meatloaf every week, then hey, I would look into making your own bacon or getting, you know, a really high quality source of bacon. The main concern here is the omega-6 content, because, you know, even with organic bacon, they're feeding the pigs corn and soy. So 1 package of bacon is just enough. And we'll put 1 just across like that. And now what we do is take about half of this glaze and we'll spoon it over the bacon. In goes the meat. I think 2 pounds is actually a bit too much for this loaf pan. So what I'll do is I'll save the extra and I'll make it into meatballs or something later. The thing is, this meatloaf recipe probably looks really similar to, you know, any of my past recipes with ground beef. You know, because on a carnivore diet, all you can really do is add various dairy products, butter, cheese, milk, eggs. There's only so many, you know, carnivore ingredients out there that this really utilizes all of them. So whether you want to make this into meatballs or meatloaf or burgers, universal ingredient application here. This looks good. I do think the brains organ grind is going to be a little bit overkill on the flavor profile. You know, you could always do, and what I would have actually done if I had it was half organ grind and half ground beef. You know, so keep in mind, if you smell the organ grind, you're like, whoa, this has a lot of liver. Add some regular ground beef to it, dilute it, and see how that tastes. So this is going to go in the oven, 350, 375, until the internal temperature is around 125, 130 degrees. You can actually pop this in the fridge and cook it at a later time. If you don't want to do it immediately, that's up to you. So we have the oven preheated on 350, and the main concern here is the amount of fat in this meatloaf. You know, you have the bacon on top of the butter, on top of the lamb brains. There's so much fat in this meatloaf that if the eggs don't cook and set the meat, we're gonna have beef tallow soup here. So you don't want it too hot, you don't want the oven too cold, and we don't want to cook it too long. So we're gonna keep an eye on this. Internal temperature anywhere from like high 120s to low 130s, and then we want to let it cool. So I'm gonna keep a good eye on this. So this is exactly what I was worried about. There's a lot of fat bubbling on the end, like rendered fat, and the inside of this meatloaf is still pretty much raw. So we're gonna turn down the heat to 325. We switched to the bottom oven because we smoked out the top oven, and it looks like we're about to smoke out the bottom oven too. I am going to take this out, hypothetically without starting a grease fire or scalding my hands. Look at that, tallow soup, 115-ish. So this is probably going to go up to 120, 123, a little less than what we want, but this is rendering so much that what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit in the fridge for a couple hours, and then we'll be able to take it out. We'll put the rest of the glaze on it, and we'll slice it. So just to understand, yes, you know, we could have probably added more Grana Padano cheese, and it would have firmed up a little bit, maybe added less liquid, but do you want a really, really moist meatloaf that tastes more balanced, or do you want, you know, a really cheesy, drier meatloaf? So I'll see you guys in a couple hours. Nothing better on a Saturday morning than a gelatinous meatloaf, eh, boys? So here we have the rest of our fish sauce and honey glaze. We can put that on top. And the real important thing here, and the cool thing here that we did, was we made it really moist and we didn't overcook it. See how there's still a little red and pink in here? Very atypical for a meatloaf to have a rare temperature. I'm really not hungry. Like, the only thing I want to eat right now is some dirty New York City girls' lips, but we'll give this a shot. I'll do it for you guys, so please like the video in case Frankie vomits. Oh man, there's so many organs in this. The organ grind is definitely too much. Way too many organs in there. There's so much liver in this organ grind that I would definitely cut it with some more ground beef. So just keep that in mind if you make this recipe. But the meatloaf is really, really moist, really tender. I encourage you guys to get that really wet consistency on the loaf before you put it in the loaf pan, and then let it rest in the fridge overnight so you have almost like a pate as opposed to a meatloaf. I should honestly title this video like liver pate recipe, because that's basically what I made. Because of the texture and consistency of the meatloaf, plus the amount of liver in that organ grind, this is closer to a pate than a meatloaf, but it's still delicious, very, very high in nutrients. Not something you could eat a lot of. This would be really good to spread on sourdough bread with some butter. So if you guys do want to make this meatloaf recipe, those are the suggested alterations. Thank you guys for joining me today. Let me know how you like this video. It's going to be a beautiful Saturday, so I hope you guys get some sun.